Hey there. You know those times when you just know something, like a gut feeling, and it turns out you're right?
It's like a sixth sense almost.
Exactly. Well, get ready to have your mind blown because today we're diving into the world of snap judgments with Malcolm Gladwell's Blink, the power of thinking without thinking.
It's amazing how much our brains process without us even realizing it. Gladwell calls it thinking without thinking for a reason.
So right out the bat, Gladwell throws out this term, thin slicing, and it's wild.
Huh.
He talks about this art expert who could spot a fake statue just by glancing at it.
It's incredible, right? Turns out our brains pick up on these tiny details, these subtle cues, way before our conscious minds can catch up.
It's like our brains have this secret radar.
And it's not just art experts either. We all do it every day. Ever walk into a room and just get a weird vibe?
Oh yeah, totally.
That's your brain thin slicing, picking up on people's facial expressions, their body language, all those little things we don't even consciously register.
Gladwell has this great analogy. He calls it the fist of a relationship. It's like, you know how your best friend listens with their whole body, not just their ears.
Right, it's their unique way of being.
Exactly. And your brain recognizes that instantly. But get this. He says you can even predict a surgeon's likelihood of getting sued just by their tone of voice.
It sounds crazy, but it goes back to those unconscious associations. A surgeon with a really dominant or impersonal tone might signal a lack of empathy.
So even if they're a great surgeon, patients might pick up on that and feel uneasy.
And that lack of trust can really make a difference.
This is blowing my mind. So it's not just about what someone says, it's how they say it. Our brains are picking up on all these subtle signals. But hold on, this thin slicing thing, it's not always a good thing, right? Gladwell also talks about how these snap judgments can be totally off base.
Absolutely, like when we judge someone solely on their appearance.
Right. And Gladwell uses the example of Warren Harding. People thought he'd be a shoo-in for president just because he looked the part. Tall, handsome, distinguished.
And we all know how that turned out.
Not great. It's like we're hardwired to judge a book by its cover, even though we know we shouldn't. And speaking of hidden biases, Gladwell talks about this fascinating experiment called the implicit association test, the IAT. Have you heard of this?
Oh yeah, the IAT. It's pretty eye-opening.
It basically revealed that even people who thought they were totally unbiased had these unconscious biases. Like, whoa.
It's true. The IAT showed that we all have these deeply ingrained associations, especially about things like race and gender, that we might not even be aware of.
It makes you wonder how much these hidden biases are affecting our everyday decisions. I mean, could they be influencing something as big as, I don't know, buying a car?
It's definitely possible. Gladwell actually talks about research showing that car salespeople, despite their best intentions, often offered worse deals to women and minority buyers.
No way.
It's true. And it wasn't intentional discrimination, it was their unconscious biases creeping in.
That is wild. So we're making these snap judgments all the time, but how do we know when to trust our gut and when to slow down? Gladwell talks about this really interesting idea called temporary autism. Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah, it's like being so overwhelmed that your brain kind of goes into overdrive, and some of those social signals get lost in the process.
So you're saying our brains prioritize survival over being polite.
Basically. It's like you're back in fight or flight mode, and all those subtle cues that we usually pick up on just get drowned out.
That makes sense. But how do we avoid making those mistakes when the pressure's on?
That's where Gladwell emphasizes the importance of creating mental space, even for a few seconds, just to hit pause and really think things through.
Like giving your brain a chance to catch up.
Exactly. Because it's not about dismissing our intuition altogether. Those snap judgments are super valuable.
Right. They often lead to really quick and accurate decisions.
Exactly. It's more about recognizing both the strengths and the weaknesses of those gut feelings so we can harness their power, but also be aware of those pitfalls.
So we need to know when to trust our gut A&D, when to maybe pump the brakes a little bit.
Exactly. And Gladwell tells this fascinating story about this military exercise where this super experienced commander completely outmaneuvered a team that was relying way too heavily on technology and logic.
But they were overthinking it.
Exactly. They were so busy analyzing every single detail that they missed the bigger picture while this commander was able to just act on instinct and experience.
That's wild. It's like he instinctively understood the whole concept of blink before Gladwell even wrote the book.
Right. And it shows how powerful those gut decisions can be, especially in situations that are constantly changing.
It makes me wonder, though, if our unconscious is so powerful, Why do we even need conscious thought?
That's a question Gladwell asks too. And he argues that conscious thought is really important for fine-tuning those gut reactions.
It's like having a second set of eyes.
Yes. Your unconscious mind gives you the initial hunch, and then your conscious mind steps in to double-check and make sure you're not missing anything crucial.
So it's all about finding that balance between intuition and logic.
Precisely. It's like a dance between the two.
And speaking of creative thinking, Gladwell also talks about thin slicing in fields like improv comedy.
Right. Yeah. Where it's all about trusting your gut and reacting in the moment.
Those actors, they have to be masters of picking up on those subtle cues from their scene partners.
It's amazing to watch them think on their feet like that.
It really is. So even in something as spontaneous as improv, there's still that element of thinking without thinking happening.
Absolutely. It's like their brains are just wired for those quick creative connections.
This whole concept has really got me thinking about those times you meet someone new and instantly get a good or bad feeling about them.
First impressions are definitely driven by thin slicing.
Our brains are like, Danger Will Robinson,
Yeah.
or, hey, this person seems cool.
Exactly. And those snap judgments can be really accurate, but we also have to be careful not to let those first impressions solidify into something more permanent.
Because we all know how wrong first impressions can be sometimes.
Right. It's about recognizing that people are complex and our initial impressions might not always tell the whole story.
So how much of our lives do you think are shaped by these split-second decisions we make without even realizing it?
Probably more than we'd like to admit. From what we buy at the grocery store to those big life decisions.
That's like our unconscious is always working behind the scenes.
And Gladwell's really good at showing us how those hidden influences work both for us and against us.
And one of the things he talks about is how our snap judgments can be influenced by external factors like branding and marketing.
Oh, absolutely.
It's almost like our brains are being tricked by packaging and logos.
Well, companies put a lot of effort into creating a certain feeling or association with their products.
So they're playing on our unconscious desires.
Right. They know that our brains are hardwired to look for those shortcuts, so they use things like colors, fonts, even the sound a package makes when you open it to try to tap into our emotions.
It's kind of scary when you think about it, how much of our decision-making is influenced by these things we're not even aware of.
It's definitely something to be mindful of. But on a more positive note, Gladwell also suggests that we can actually train our brains to be more aware of those unconscious biases.
Oh, really? How do we do that?
It takes conscious effort, for sure. Like anything else we want to get better at, it's like building a muscle.
So what kind of exercises are we talking about here?
Gladwell talks about the importance of exposure, like actively seeking out positive examples that challenge those stereotypes we've been exposed to.
So if I'm constantly bombarded with negative portrayals of a certain group of people, I need to make an effort to find alternative narratives.
Exactly. It's about diversifying the information we're taking in and questioning those assumptions that might be lingering in our subconscious.
So it's not enough to just say, I'm not biased. We have to actively work against those ingrained biases.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process of self-reflection and education.
This has given me a lot to think about. It's like Blink isn't just a book about how our brains work. It's a call to action, right?
Absolutely. Gladwell wants us to take this knowledge and use it to become more mindful, more aware of how our minds work.
So we can make better decisions and create a more just and equitable world.
Precisely.
Wow. This deep dive has been incredible. It's amazing how much our brains are doing behind the scenes.
It really is. Gladwell does such a great job of making these complex ideas accessible and engaging.
If anyone wants to learn more about the power and the pitfalls of thinking without thinking, I highly recommend checking out Blink.
It's a must-read for sure.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, keep those brains firing and those snap judgments in check.